engine running.
Absolute genius.
Get this.
Welcome.
This is the show where we bring you
Science.
What that essentially means is
discoveries,
Advances.
Questions. Research.
technology.
Unbelievable.
Without further ado,
This is The Naked Scientists. Hello, welcome to The Naked Scientists, the show where we bring you the biggest breakthroughs and talk to the major movers and shakers in the worlds of science, technology and medicine. I'm Chris Smith, and today we're raising a glass in honour of Burns Night with a very special show on the science of Scotch production. The origins of malt whisky distilling in Scotland are shrouded in ancient history dating back to monks probably in the 15th century or earlier. Now, while the craft of distillation has been practiced for centuries, the intricate aromas and flavours of the drink remain something of a dark art, even today. So, this week we are going to give you the inside story and lift the lid on the ton of the whisky making process, right through from barley to Burns Night. And it all begins with the malting process, where the best quality barley is steeped in water until it starts to germinate, so it ramps up enzyme activity and begins to unlock the chemical energy that's stored in the barley seeds. And it just so happens that all this goes on a lot closer to home than I first thought. I went to see Richard Broadbent at Station Maltings in the nearby town of Whittam in Essex. Hello, Richard.
Hi Chris, nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. I have lost count of the number of times I've stood at Whittam train station and I've seen this place. I had no idea where it was and what it was.
Yeah, so welcome to Soufflé Beards Malt's Whittam malting site. So one of our 5 malting sites in the UK. So we believe there's been malting on site since the 1940s, and the infrastructure you can see behind you, that dates back to 1961. So that's the oldest piece of equipment that we have on site.
And for people who've never been to a malting, which includes me actually, what comes in and what goes out from a place like this?
We take in malting barley from our community of farmers around about our malting site, and then we malt that barley into a malted product for either brewers or distillers to make beer and whisky with.
Where does the barley come from? Is it all local?
Predominantly local, yes. So around about us today, so Essex, Suffolk, a little bit of Cambridgeshire, a little bit of Hertfordshire, probably anywhere 50 to 60 miles circumference around about our malting site here.
And how much comes in every year?
So we make roughly 50,000 tonnes of malted barley per year, and that requires about 65,000 tonnes of barley from the farmer each year.
And where does it go? Where do you sell it to?
So this site makes around about 50,000 tonnes. Of that, about half would be exported to the Far East and North America, and the rest would be used in the UK for the domestic market or brewing and distilling.
Did I hear that correctly? You're sending malted barley to the Far East. Can they not grow their own?
So the UK is great at growing malted barley and malting it into high quality brewing and distilling malt. So it's well regarded across the globe, and our products are equally. The Japanese, Taiwanese, etc., they will pay for high quality brewing and distilling malts.
That means then that when I buy a really fancy Japanese whiskey, the likelihood is I'm drinking whiskey that the raw material has actually probably come from here.
Yes, absolutely. So the Japanese, a long history of buying UK brewing and distilling malts.
You're going to show me the process that goes on in a plant like this. Where do we start?
So I think we'll start in barley intake, so which is where we see the barley for the first time. Take you down there. Before we do that, we'll need to kit you out with some PPE so that we can enter the plant. And then from barley intake, we'll walk through the various steps of our malting process through steeping, germination and kilning, and then outloading to our customers.
Working in a hospital normally, I love PPE.
Yes, so it's not a fashion show, it's very much about safety. So we're heading down to our barley intake weighbridge area. Each lorry load of barley that comes to us will weigh around about 29 tonnes, and we have to carry out a number of quality analysis on each load that arrives on site before we tip it and accept it from the farmer. We keep around about 35,000 tonnes of stock at any given point. During harvest we take in the majority, and then we fill up our silos as full as we can get them, and then as we use barley through the rest of the year we refill them.
Now, why barley? Why is that so special?
So barley is the perfect cereal for making beer and whiskey. So barley has a very strong husk which protects the grain during our processing. It has a high amount of starch, protein and enzyme potential, all of which are important to the brewers and distillers later. And our climate is perfect in the UK for growing malting barley as well.
Where are we going now?
So we'll head up to the barley weighbridge up here and have a look at some of the barley that we brought in today. So we're in our barley intake lab. So this is where we carry out all the quality analysis on the grain to make sure that the grain that we're seeing on our weighbridge is the grain that we've contracted from the farmer, and to make sure that the grain is going to grow in our maltings when we actually get to the point of processing it at some point in the future.
When you drink a single malt, does actually what goes into that, is it a huge, great collection of different barleys that you've started with, or do you work in a strict batch? This is one farm, one batch process.
We would contract with a number of our farmers. So around about this site, we probably have about 100 farmers. We contract certain varieties at certain quality parameters, and then we will bring those in at roughly the same time to then fill up some of the bins that you saw us behind us. So we might fill up a 2,000 tonne bin with maybe 20 farms of the same variety, the same quality parameters, and we will then process that bin for our customers thereafter.
So what happens now? You've got a batch of barley, you say it passes muster. What's the next step?
So after the intake process, we put the barley into our stores, and then we recover the barley and make sure that the barley is going to grow when it gets actually into our steep tank. So in the UK, we have a very light amount of dormancy in our grain, so it probably grows 6 or 8 weeks after harvest. And then we'll take it to our steep tanks, and the steeping process is the first phase of the malting process. That's where we go next. It's going to be hot then. Okay, we'll literally only be in there for a minute then. So we've come up to the first phase of the malting process, which is steeping, which is where we take our raw barley and we add moisture, which initiates the biochemical processes within the grain. So
that's germination, isn't it? You're starting it growing.
Exactly. So the barley grain is effectively a seed that we are commencing the germination phase of each and every one of the millions and billions of seeds in each and every batch that we make. So we need to add moisture, and the steeping process is how we do that.
But why do you need to germinate it? What does that do that is useful to yielding and releasing what's locked up in that seed?
The barley grain is starch globules covered in protein, and there is some enzyme there, but it's very low levels. And what we do in the steeping process is hydrate the endosperm. We initiate all the enzyme potential and increase those enzymes, and then those enzymes will then break down the protein, and they will break down the cell wall material. So at the end of germination, we have got a much smaller level of proteins. The starch is there, but it's now released from its bound protein matrix that it was in as barley, and the enzymes are all around about the starch. And at that point, we put it in our kiln, which is effectively a big oven, to then dry it down and fix that enzymic protein and starch mix that we have created.
I think I need to grow a bit to see into these tanks, but they're enormous. They must be about 4 or 5 metres across, these big circular tanks, and I can see damp grain in there.
Yep. Yeah, so this batch has been in here for roughly 24 hours. We steep in a new batch every day, and this batch will be in these tanks for 2 days, so we've got another set of steep tanks just through the wall there as well.
I can see water dribbling into one of the tanks next to us. So basically you put 28-ish tonnes or whatever of barley in there, and then half fill it up to just soak the grain and then drain that off, and you just repeat that a few times, do you?
Yes, so we repeat that one more time. So there's the first immersion where we put the grain in and then we fill the water to just above the grain bed so that all of the grain is homogeneously covered in water, and then we rouse it a bit to make sure again that it's all well mixed. And then that first wet phase might be 6 or 8 hours, and then we'll drain it off, and then that's an air rest for it could be 10 hours. And then we'll again fill the tank with water above the grain bed for maybe another 6 or 8 hours. And that second immersion should take the moisture level from the initial starting point of 12 up to say 44% moisture, and then there's a small air rest at the end until it's ready to move to germination. So we'll go to one of the 4 germination vessels that we have on site.
Hopefully it's a bit warmer because it's a bit chilly in here.
It's definitely warmer.
They're tall, those tanks, aren't they? Because we've just come down all the stairs that correspond to how tall they would have been. So they're quite big.
Yeah, so I think the grain bed is around about 3 metres deep in those tanks.
And the conveyors will bring what we were just watching once it's had its immersion, so they'll bring it over here.
Yes, so they'll take the fully steeped grain, damp barley effectively, that started its germination process. So it's 170 tonnes of that grain along the rubber conveying belts that you can see behind us into the vessel. And we'll load this vessel in about 3 hours, and then we'll look after it in here for 4 days.
Oh, my goodness. You weren't wrong, were you, when you said it'll be warmer in here? It's like a hurricane-force wind of hot, damp air coming out the door.
Yeah, so we maintain the temperature level in here around about 16 degrees centigrade air on and maybe 18 or 19 degrees centigrade air off. So that hence the nice warm feeling that we got going through the door.
This is a bit like the ring in a circus. It's that sort of size, isn't it? Circus ring. The floor is a whole heap of barley, and you have a device that effectively stirs it and spreads it out as though you were spreading sand around the floor of your circus ring. And how often do you turn it over then to mix it up?
So this turning machine that you can see in front of us actually moves very slowly. It takes around about 3 hours to get a full circumference of the vessel. So we make sure that we keep the vessel turned a couple of times a day anyway. That keeps the rootlets from matting together. It allows the air that you can feel coming past us to evenly flow through the bed. And effectively what we're doing, replacing the air which is around about the grain. So it's respiring, it's taking in oxygen and producing CO2 just much as we would. So we're using large amounts of air to replace the oxygen and also control the temperature to the set point temperatures that we're after.
How long will it stay in here?
So we germinate in these vessels for 4 days, and that is the perfect amount of time to break down the proteins as we need to and generate enough of the enzymes for our customers to use in their process later on.
And then where next?
So from this germination vessel, we'll go to the kiln.
Good grief, not even in there yet. You have to pay a fortune in Finland for an experience like this, you know, Richard. Good grief! Oh,
We don't take tourists in here for sure.
how is the heat produced? Is this gas or electricity?
Yeah, so currently this is gas.
It's incredibly hot, and I mean that's sauna temperature. That isn't it? That's really, really hot. What's your gas bill like?
It's huge. Yes, it's absolutely huge.
I mean, the current economic climate must have made that even trickier.
Yes, it has. It's made our products more expensive. It's made ultimately it's made the beer that everybody buys in the pub or the supermarket has made that more expensive, and it's made the whiskey, which is being laid down for the future, more expensive as well.
For people who didn't get to experience the sauna I just did at home, where we were, it looked pretty similar to where we just were, except that it was 9 million degrees. It was really, really hot. But it's basically the same thing. You've got a thinner bed of malt, and you're turning that for a period of time, and you're just drying it out. So how long will it spend in there doing that?
Our heating process, our burn process, is about 19 hours. So, and then there's the filling and emptying as well. And that allows us to take the moisture maybe from about 40% going in, reduce the moisture level down, and then start to build the temperature up towards the end of the process, which we just felt there just now. And those latter stages, they start to create the flavour and colour compounds and also fix the enzyme potential, holds those enzymes in stasis for the onward processing at brewing or distilling phase.
So despite the extreme heat in there, the enzymes in the grains do remain viable and intact, and when they go to the brewery or the distillery, they will reactivate, reanimate, and start to break down the seed.
It's absolutely imperative that we give the brewer and distiller a high degree of enzymes as well as the starch which we're giving them. So the brewer needs the starch to then convert into sugar, but to convert it into sugar it needs the enzymes. So we need to give them high level of enzymes as well. And of course, once the brewer, say, has converted their starch into sugar with the enzymes, that's when the yeast can then utilise the sugar and to convert into alcohol.
Where does it go next after it's been dried?
So we put it into our storage facility where we take a sample and we analyse it in our central laboratory in Arbroath. When we have a full set of analysis, we can then determine that it meets our customer specifications, and we can then program it for delivery to one of our many customers from this site, either in the UK or abroad, along the lines of their schedule.
And then next stop for stuff like what comes out of here is your home hunting ground where you hail from, and that's going to be Scotland and the whisky industry.
Yes, exactly. So the whisky distilling industry requires very high quantity of the malted products each year, largely distilling malt, plain distilling malt, and a little bit of peated malt, which we produce both for our customers in Scotland.
Well, I've had a blast. It's been amazing to see this, and I started by saying I've stood outside this plant on that railway station and looked up at this for so many years and wondered what goes on here, and now I know.
Yeah, well, I'm very pleased to be able to show you and allow your listeners to hear about what we do. People don't really understand what it takes to get a pint of beer on the bar or a bottle of whiskey on the shelf.
Are you a Burns night man?
I definitely am, yes. I'm going to a burn supper in the outskirts of Edinburgh.
Do you get some freebies? Will you be able to turn up with a decent bottle of Staff?
Sadly, we don't get too many freebies from our customers, so no, sadly not.
Oh, what a terrible shame. In any case, I'm sure he'll be enjoying himself on his Burns night supper. That was Richard Broadbent of Station Maltings. Thanks to Richard, we're now very familiar with how the best quality barley is readied for turning into the best quality whisky. That magic, though, happens north of the border. So I went to visit Alistair MacDonald, who manages the Clydeside Distillery in Glasgow.
So this is malted barley that's went from the farm, it's went through the malting process that you've been to see. It contains starch, and to expose the starch, what we have to do is drop it down through a 4-roller mill. It all becomes combined. Malted barley goes through the mill, it comes out as grist. Grist has a ratio, and we set up the mill to achieve 70% middles or grits, 20% husks is the outer casing of the barley, and then 10% flour. And we feel as though that's the optimum ratio to help the conversion of starch into sugar in the next part of the process, the mashing.
Always wondered where that term grist to the mill came from. Now I've actually seen it in the flesh.
Yeah.
And the other thing I was surprised by, so you mill that down and all of the stuff, all of the husk and everything is going into the process. You're not separating out. Like if we were making flour for bread, we'd keep the starch and throw away the hard bits. You keep the lot.
Yeah, it all ends up in the mash itself. The difference being here, when it comes through the mill, the top rollers of the mill basically do the kind of rough grind and throws the outer case and the husk over the top of the roller. The husk is important for drainage. If you can see the size of the husk, the particles of the husk allow the sugary liquid that we're converting to drain out through the mash.
How big is each batch that you run then of this, and where will it go next?
So this is it's a 1.5 ton batch, and once we've run this through the mill, it takes about 2 hours to run it through the mill. It's transferred through into the grist bin, which is getting it ready for the next part of the process, which is the mashing process. So that's where we're going next. And this is us here at the mash tun. You can see this vessel with the copper top on it, and this is where the next part of the process starts.
It's a massive, great tank. There's a window in the front. We can look inside and see what's going on inside, and a big pipe coming in from above. Is that presumably how you load it with the material we saw that was being milled?
Yeah, so the 1.5 ton that we've just milled sits in this tank above the mash tun. And what we do is we gravity feed that grist down into the mash tun at the same time as we're adding in hot water. So the two mix in like a solution. And what's important to us is that the grist comes in at a certain flow rate along with a certain temperature of water. And it's that strike temperature that's important to converting the starch into sugar in the mashing process.
1.5 tons of the grist, the starting milled material. How much water?
It's 5,900 litres in the first water.
Water's really important, isn't it? Where do you get yours? Not out of the Clyde, out the window, presumably. That looks a bit dirty.
No, it's not. Definitely can confirm it's not from the River Clyde. It's actually from a loch called Loch Catrin. It's about 30 to 40 miles from here, and it's actually good Scottish soft water. In fact, it's Glasgow's Towns water, so it's good quality Scottish soft water that's important for whisky distilling.
So in the ton in front of us, we've got that 1.5 tons of grist. You're beginning to add that nearly 6,000 litres of Glasgow tap water.
Yes.
And it's slowly being turned and mixed. So what's actually happening in there then?
The conversion of starch into sugar happens through obviously chemistry, and it's enzymes that are breaking down the starches into sugar. The sugar solution is actually called wort in the industry. We pump the wort into the washback, and what we're left with is some remaining sugars in the bottom of this mash, and we want to reclaim the very last of these sugars out, and we do this with water at a higher temperature. Clydeside here, we want to create a clear wort, so it looks like a Pilsner lager type going through the pipes before it goes to fermentation, and we feel as though that works very well for the flavour profile we're looking for this lowland style single malt whisky.
Now tell us about the yeast side of it as we walk to where you're pumping this stuff to. The ton we were just seeing, the material that's in there, the liquid, has now been piped over to one of these enormous, I mean, these are huge, great tanks.
Yeah, you're right. That's 7,500 litre stainless steel tanks, and we pump the sugary liquid from the mash tun across into this vessel. We put it through a heat exchanger, we cool it down, a Watts cooler, to 36 initially for the first 200 litres. And the reason we do that, we want to rehydrate the yeast, and we have to do that at a slightly higher temperature. It just shocks the preservative coating on the yeast and allows the yeast to start to take in oxygen. If we were to leave it at 36 degrees, it would have a negative effect. It would kill all the yeast and we wouldn't have any conversion of sugar into alcohol. So we have to then start to reduce the temperature of the washback as we're filling it. And the temperature goes from 36 right down to probably about 19 degrees, as long as we're below 20 degrees C.
How long will it spend in that tank undergoing that fermentation then?
Again, it's down to personal taste and flavour profiles. Here at Clydeside, we actually do a 72-hour fermentation. We feel as though that's, again, the optimum. The alcohol tends to stop being produced around the 48 hours, but we feel as though from a flavour point of view, 72 works very well for us.
What does it look like at that stage then? Is it a bit like a kind of a beer, effectively?
You could call it a rough beer. It doesn't look like a beer, but if you were to filter off the yeast sediment and the solids from it, yeah, it just becomes like a clear, rough, malty beer.
Any good?
It is an acquired taste. It's not one I would sit down at home with myself, but it can be drank, yeah.
And how much alcohol's in that? By the end of that fermentation, what have you got it to?
Now, at the end of the fermentation, you're up to 8.4%, 8.5%. I know we're joking rough beer, but we call it fermented wash is the correct terminology. So what we're doing now is we want to take the fermented wash and we want to take it to our pot still, a copper pot still, and we want to boil it up and capture and concentrate the alcohol more. So let's make our way to the still house where this happens.
Wow, you've got the best view in Scotland, I reckon.
Yeah, it's a still house with a view, isn't it? You've got this glass box around the still that gives it the kind of greenhouse effect. These guys in the production have got the best office in the city at the moment, yeah.
They sure have. Before we talk about these two enormous stills in front of us, can you just tell us a bit about the history of this building and where we are and how you come to be literally on the dockside of the Clyde, in the middle of Glasgow?
Yeah, so the building to the right of us here is actually, it's an old pump house. It's a hydraulic water pump, and its job was to open and close a hydraulic bridge, basically allowing access of ships exporting all over the world. So we had the Queen's Dock that opened in 1877, and probably a lot of the exports from the city and from around, and whisky being one of these main exports, was being controlled by this very building that we're standing in at the moment.
We've admired the view, but the dominant feature in this, I want to call it a room, but it's like a giant conservatory, which is tens of metres tall, with these two enormous copper stills.
Yeah, so this is a distillation process that happens in here. So the fermented wash that we spoke about in the tun room and the fermentation washback, we pump through into this big copper still, and this is just like a big copper kettle, and it's got a heating element in the bottom. If you could try and describe the shape, it's an onion shape still, and halfway up the neck of the onion is basically a sight glass, and you can see the liquid dancing in the window there. It's boiling away. So what we're doing is we're capturing the vapours that are coming off the top of the still, off the swan neck, and condensing it down back into an alcohol, a liquid, a distillate. And this is running into this brass box that you see in the middle of the still house there, and this is what we call the spirit safe. The importance of the spirit safe, it allows you to see the liquid running, the rate it's running at, and it also allows you to sample the alcohol strength and temperature of the spirits, which is very important to us.
What about the stuff that we don't want to come across? There must be some bits of yeast in there, and also, are there any chemicals that you don't want to distill across? How do you get rid of those so that you just get good quality spirit?
Yeah, firstly on the solids, you've got the yeast, the dead yeast cells, you've got some fines that may have came through from the mashing process. But as you can see, it's only halfway up the neck of the still, the liquid is boiling, so there's no solids getting above that, and it's only the vapour that's coming off the top. Moving on to the spirit distillation, so all the spirit you collect from the wash still ends up being pumped into the next still, which is a similar looking still. The difference being, you'll see there's a ball in the middle of this one, a copper ball. So what we're doing is we're boiling up, exact same process, but this time you're right, there are some unwanted characteristics, unwanted flavour compounds that we want to discard at this stage, and this comes in at the early stages of the still, and we discard that back into the previous tank for the first 15 minutes, and we call this term the 4 shots. So we're running the 4 shots. Then we start to collect the new make spirit, coming in at a strength of 76.5% alcohol. Here at Clydeside, we're trying to create a delicate, clean new make character. So from 76.5 down to 71 is our final new make spirit that goes into what we call the ISR, the intermediate spirit receiver, and then it's pumped to the filling store for tankering off-site.
You distill it once, you collect everything, you put what you collect into the next distillation tank and distill it again, but you put back the first 15 minutes of what comes off back into that tank so that you don't get those characteristics going into the final blend. And what comes off of that second distillation is that 76 down to 71% alcohol, which is going to become the final product.
Yeah, that's correct. And it's not just the distillation part of the process, it's all parts. You've got the mashing, you've got the clear worts, you've got the dried yeast, the type of yeast. There's a lot of variables in there that contribute to the final whisky.
And presumably the stage we haven't yet discussed, which is it leaves here and goes into casks.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
It looks the most boring part of the process, to be honest. The cask's sitting in a warehouse for most of their life, but I would say in the region 70% of the flavour of all whiskies comes at this part of the process. So you can do all the mashing, all the fermentation, all the distillation, but depending on the quality of the wood, and it's all about what's the wood been used. Has it been sherry? Has it been wine? Has it been bourbon? The time that you store it, and there's a lot of reactions goes on. So
these are second-hand casks, and that's part and parcel of you picking the right sort of what's been in those casks before. That's an informed judgment that will inform or will directly lead to a characteristic in the product.
Yes, we predominantly use bourbon casks here.
Are you going to show me some of the product?
Absolutely, yeah. That's the best part of today, is getting the chance to go and have a nose and taste of some of the final matured whiskies. Yeah. Okay. So this is the new make spirit, and you can see it's crystal clear. There's no colour whatsoever. The spirit that's just came off the still, and we've reduced it to 63.5% and ready to go into the cask. But this is allowing you to try the new make spirit. Totally clear. It looks like water.
I would just say it looks like gin, doesn't it?
Yes.
Let me have a sniff of it. Yeah, I mean, it smells like the Classroom or Lab ethanol bottle. Okay, I'm going to try it. There's a lot of flavour to it. You can taste the barley.
You get a kind of malt, biscuity note at the beginning, but once you get into it, you start to get more of the fruity flavours from the fermentation carry through, so you've got more of a tropical fruit. We'll add a wee touch of water to it as well. And
is that what one is supposed to do with whisky? Because there seems to be mixed views on this, whether or not one should add water.
Drink it how you like it, is the answer to that, yeah. Kind of industry rule of thumb is if it's a cask strength whisky, a wee touch of water takes that sharpness, takes that kind of burn edge, and it opens up the flavours. So you've tried the new make spirit. Now let's move on to something a wee bit more enjoyable, I suppose, yeah.
This is now going to have the characteristic of the cask effect in it, isn't it? Because this has been in a cask for a period of time, so whatever was in there before has now been imparted to it. Is this from a bourbon cask then? Because this is quite pale.
This is actually our first release, and it's actually from 2 casks, believe it or not. This is from a bourbon cask and a sherry cask.
This is very smooth. The other one was quite powerful. Obviously, it was a lot stronger. But this is very, very smooth, and it's sort of velvety, slides around your mouth. And it's very, very soft and delicate.
Yeah, it has a really nice, delicate mouthfeel and a nice oily mouthfeel. So this has been just over 5 years. Reduced the strength down from 63.5% down to 46%.
So you do age it at high strength, and then you dilute it. You don't dilute it and then start the aging in the casks.
No, we dilute it down to 63.5%, and that's a kind of industry standard, which is higher than the bottle strength, as you rightly say, and we mature it at that. The reason you don't want to go at a lower strength is year on year you're losing alcohol strength, so you don't want to get down below 40.
Do you know what amazed me was when I read the fraction of food and drink exports from the UK that Scotch is as a fraction of the industry size. It's a huge proportion. It's more than a fifth, isn't it, of our exports?
Yeah, I don't know what the current figures are today, but just recently, single malt whisky makes up 25% of the export of all food and drinks export from the UK.
Well, I've got to hand it to you, Alistair. Thank you so much, because I've learned so much from you in the last hour or so I've been looking at this process. I thought I knew basically what went into this. I had no idea. So thank you so much for giving me the insights and to see the product go from where we started, which was some grains of malted barley, to emerging as something that is firewater. And then when you add the cask, tastes delicious. It's been a real treat. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure to take you through a quick journey of the processes. Thank you very much for your time, and hopefully your listeners will come and see us here next time they're in Glasgow and enjoy the same experience that you've had.
And I really did enjoy it. Thank you so much to Alistair MacDonald at the Clydeside Distillery in Glasgow, and a happy Burns night to everyone who's celebrating it. That's all we have time for this week. Next time, the final instalment of this season's Titans of Science. We'll hear from the world-leading cancer specialist Charlie Swanton. He's made fighting the disease his life's work, and he tells me why, in recent years, we've had to radically revise our view of what's really going on in cancer. The Naked Scientist comes to you from the University of Cambridge's Institute of Continuing Education. It is supported by Rolls-Royce, but it's also supported by you, our listeners, because you very kindly do step up and support us with donations. Some of you regularly, some in a one-off fashion. This really helps. So if you enjoy this programme and would like to show your support for us, please head on over to nakedscientist.com/donate, and we would be extremely grateful for anything you can spare to help us keep the show on the road. I'm Chris Smith, and from all of us here at the team, thanks for listening, and until next time, goodbye.